Welcome, everyone, to the Heart of Meditation podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Ricardo.
And I'm Ryan Burton.
So, today's episode will be about the struggles of the path and sort of what Ryan and I have encountered during our spiritual path, so to speak. So, let me pose this question on to Ryan. Ryan, what have you encountered that may be kind of different than what you originally thought may happen to you later on? Or there's certain pitfalls you've fallen under?
Yeah, I think many people fall prey to this specific thing, especially if we were born or raised in the West. When we first get into a practice or we join a community or we find a teacher, some of us can have beginner's luck and actually have some pretty profound breakthrough, transformative, even supernormal experiences from the outset. And what we can find ourselves doing after those really incredible plateaus or mystical experiences is that we could spend the following years chasing them or trying to get back there.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing about that is those experiences, unless they were pretty intentional, unless there's something that you have trained yourself in, they're usually they usually happen by chance. It was not something that was planned. So just right off the bat, I and many people try to seek or try to re-experience something that is not really experienceable by force, by effort, or by striving or craving. And you'll spend time spinning your wheels trying to get back there.
Right.
What do you think, Ricardo?
And there's nothing wrong with having those experience. I think and wanting to re-experience those sensations and phenomenons. The problem is when, like you were saying, you try to force it or it becomes a goal. And it's not like, again, there's nothing wrong with having a goal, but once the goal encompasses you, then it starts to cause issues. You start to have a goal like, okay, at this day or this time, I want to experience that, which what happened to me, especially when I was a monk. Like, I had a goal. I'm gonna open my third eye. Did it happen? No. But like the sort of pitfalls I've sort of encountered was when that's one of them when I was a monk, or the other one was when I thought meditation concentration practices would suddenly open my heart up. And like going back to the first episode, I sort of encountered this blockage later on, but in the beginning I thought, oh, it's just meditation is going to open me up emotionally. But personally, I was doing it wrong. I wasn't coming across it correctly. So that's one of the pitfalls I made, and it's not until later on where I started to open up emotionally in my practice.
Yeah, the difficult thing as well is that a lot of these definitions, a lot of these translations, whether they're from Pali or they're from Sanskrit, can be confusing. For example, the word samadhi in Buddhist meditation has been translated to the word concentration, but their definition or their uh, what samadhi is in that tradition is very different from our actual definition of concentration. When the typical Westerner thinks of concentration, we think of what we learned in school,
Yeah.
which was having to focus or direct our attention, mostly with effort and force, at a specific subject or
Right.
at a specific thing. Now, that definition of concentration, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people in this field, is that is incompatible. It's a wrong definition of concentration. when we're doing concentration practice on the breath or an object, what happens is that you become the object, like you actually disappear and vanish into the object. So I had this interpretation that, you know, I just, with force and effort, I just keep my attention on this breath or on this specific mental image for long enough, and then I'll enter a samadhi or I'll attain jhana. And what actually happens is it's more like you have a presence with the object. It's more like you have an observation of the object, and gradually your sense of self disappears and your awareness becomes submerged, absorbed in the object. It's more of a practice of letting go than it is of using force. Because what I found is that if you're using force on the object, if you're using force in meditation, that force, that effort is the thing that will obstruct awareness from becoming absorbed in the object. So from the outstart, just from the start, most of us were already on the wrong foot.
Right. Right. And once we start to use force, we start to tense up. It's using the mind in order to quiet the mind, but you're still using the mind, right? Because you're forcing. Why are you forcing? It's you wanting to achieve something, or you think you have some sort of projection about your meditation, where it should be, what it should feel like, or some sort of faculty like that. Now, the other thing that I found out was there is a basis to all meditations, sitting meditations, which is one, when you sit down, thoughts and feelings are going to arise, and it's okay. Let it happen. It is fine. Anxieties, tension, that's perfectly fine. You're still concentrating on the object. You're still being observant of these things that arise. It's like when the thoughts arise or the emotions arises, you're not supposed to be like, okay, they're my enemies. I have to go back to the object. That's force. If it arises, again, they're just going to simply arise and pass away. And it's perfectly fine, normal. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to do when those things arises. Whereas for me, when I was younger, again, these things were my enemies in a way. It's like, okay, I cannot let one emotion, one thought distract where I am at in my meditation. Ironically enough, I did have good concentration, but it was purely out of force. And for me, it caused a sort of disassociation with my emotions and body because of this forcefulness. And that obviously is not meditation.
Yeah, the interesting thing about concentration is that if you use your attention with force on an object, there's only a certain period of time that attention can be sustained. Like that muscle can be developed until it can be sustained on an object for further and more extended periods of time. But this is still an unrefined, a more grotesque form of stability, of concentration. So by concentration or by samadhi, not as an attainment but as a practice, we mean the continuation, the continual presence and mindfulness that begins to cultivate, begins to develop when you're practicing meditation.
Right.
So the idea is eventually to become continually mindful, and like your mindfulness is extending, it's continuing. When you first start in meditation, maybe you have mindfulness and relaxation for 10 seconds. As your practice develops, that becomes 2 minutes. As your practice develops further, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Literally, your mind is able to remain present with the object undistractedly for extended periods of time.
Right.
So when these extended periods of time reach longer and longer lengths, eventually all kinds of transformations and all kinds of phenomena begin to arise. But ultimately, it leads to absorptions, or it leads to these more transcendent awakened states of consciousness. So the thing with using force and effort in concentration or in meditation is that you're activating the doer. You're engaging the doing faculty of the mind. So as long as you're doing, as long as you're putting effort into doing, there is less beingness, there's less being in the meditation. So that continual mindfulness, that continual presence is the result of actually the doing part of the mind shutting down or slowing down or taking the back seat, and the being part of the mind, the part of the mind that is naturally present, that comes to the forefront. And as long as you're doing, as long as you're trying, as long as you're pushing, you're literally working with the aspect of the mind that is not able to remain in continuous presence, to remain in continuous stillness and continuous peace. It's actually, you're literally working with the wrong side of the mind when it comes to where you want to go in meditation and where the practice really, really unfolds to.
Right. So, and now in this context of pitfalls, what other things have you seen or have you encountered?
One of the things is you could be meticulous about your practice. Some people are meticulous about their practice and other people are not. And it seems to vary from person to person. For example, if you're a type A individual or you're a person that's overly meticulous, then being too meticulous about your practice is good. It might be an issue for you. So, for example, if you're that kind of person and you start to have specific obstacles, it may be more appropriate that you not pay so much attention to them and just continue with the practice with mindfulness or presence, whatever it is. Now, if you're the kind of person that's not very meticulous at all or not very detail oriented, you could have these obstacles and basically impediments that are arising in meditation, but because you're not acknowledging them or dealing with them, you actually are just continuing to perpetuate them.
Right.
So a type A person, they could have agitation could be a problem in their meditation sessions. They find that they're overly agitated. They can't really relax. So one advice or one remedy to that is to do your best to calm yourself down further, or just ignore the agitation to the best that you can.
Well, so would you say not ignore so much, just be aware of why you're agitated?
Yeah, more like
not why.
You don't let
why.
You don't let that agitation derail you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
From presence or from mindfulness. You allow that agitation to be a part of the process, but you don't give it much attention. So that's what I mean by ignoring it. And so with another person, they could have sleepiness as a problem in their meditation, and because they're not a really meticulous or detail-oriented person, or they might not see it as an issue, what could happen is that you could spend 3 years sleeping when you actually think that you were meditating. That's an issue. If there is not mindfulness, if there is not presence, but just sleep, that's literally what you're doing. You're just sleeping. So we shouldn't mistake what something actually is for something else. Sleep and meditation are very different things. If you are so tired that you need to sleep, and then you get up and you awaken and you meditate afterwards, okay, that's fine. But it's best that we not make the mistake of sleeping in meditation and actually thinking that it's meditation when really there's no consciousness or awareness at all.
Right. Well, another pitfall that I'll explain is when you're very deep in your meditations and two things arises. One, the first thing is extreme happiness. Now, when extreme happiness pops up, what is a person's first motivation or first intention when this feeling arises? It is to grasp on it and be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling the sensations. And what's going to happen is you're going to start to get attached to the feelings. It's kind of like what we explained earlier. When you've had a spiritual experience or something like that, you're going to want to to relive it. And so once your mind starts to grasp onto this feeling of happiness, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing separated. But now you're using the mind to start to grasp, or another way to phrase it is, you're no longer the doer, you're now being enslaved by this feeling, right? Because happiness is, it'll arise no matter what. It's always going to be there, but now you want to relive it. Just like out in society, where the moment that we feel happy, it is great, but at any moment that happiness can cut off. Can someone, you'll be driving, someone cuts you off, then what? You're no longer happy. And we strive for this happiness. We really do. We don't want to live a bad experience. And so one pitfall that happens is we want to be happy. And this want creates it becomes a bad desire and a controlling factor in our meditation practice. Because who says that we need to be happy? Is it the ego? Is it you? Or like, what is it? Society? What's this mechanism in you that says I need to be happy? Now, there again, it's, you should be happy. Everyone should be happy. But what is happiness? Logically, it could be a projection of people's ideas, like, oh, happiness looks like having material things. It looks like, oh, I should be like the Buddha. He looks happy. We don't know what happiness is until you start to really investigate the mind in a very non-judgmental way. Because happiness for you can be something different for me. Does that make sense? So,
yeah.
Now another thing that happens is when things of suffering comes up in your meditation. Just like in society, or just like in some sort of thing that you do in real life, when suffering comes up, what's the first thing we do? It's to push it away, or to do something that's complete opposite. Try to ignore it, try to do this, try to distract ourselves. Now, in our meditation, when that arises, again, it's the exact same thing that happens when the happiness arises. You acknowledge it, you let it be there. It's okay. I remember when sufferings were coming up in my meditations and traumas, obviously my first instinct was, I don't want to experience this. I don't want to feel it. I want to be happy. I don't want to relive and feel the sensations throughout my body of anger, frustration, depression. But the more you start to practice in a very observant way, you'll start to notice how you react, and start to notice the mechanisms in which you protect yourself from the suffering, from the traumas, or whatever the experience is in your life, be it in your meditation or outside of it.
Yeah, and in my experience and in my opinion, from the different traditions I've practiced in, from a Zen point of view, for example, you have equanimity whether suffering is arising or whether happiness is arising.
Right.
And the point is to not have the mind cling to any state or any experience, whether it's internal or external. Now, in other traditions, for example, in Theravada or in Vajrayana, happiness and bliss have an essential role in the development of concentration and in the attainment and entering of various samadhis or various meditative states. So on one hand, it's true that there's definitely a place for not clinging to experiences, whether they're good or bad, elated or of a suffering nature. But on the other hand, there are specific ways to work with happiness or to work with bliss as it's arising in the practice. Some traditions and some teachers may say, okay, don't pay attention to any bliss, don't pay attention to any light, don't pay attention to any feelings of elation. Whereas other traditions have light, bliss, happiness, and elation as side effects of the mind becoming still and of the mind becoming unified and collected on its specific object. So I just wanted to make that point. Some traditions will say one thing about a specific set of experiences, and another tradition will say one thing about those same set that same set of experiences and phenomena.
Right. And bliss and happiness, it's when I sort of I want to clarify that when I mean about happiness and bliss, it's not this human factor of it. It's not a idea. We have an idea of what bliss and happiness is, but it's not that. You know, I feel when that state arises, it's not being attached to it, but open up your arms to it, experience it. But then it's like going back to the clinging part. Has anyone felt the clinging of wanting to be in bliss? Even if you're an avid meditator, I know I did. I don't know about you, Ryan. Did you have you ever had that where it's like, oh, I feel this bliss, let me stay in it?
Yeah, for sure. Especially in the beginning. I remember on one of my first meditation retreats in Thailand, I had this, I think I'd done the skeleton contemplation, and this massive light arose from the center of my body, and the bliss was so strong. It was like being in ecstasy for 3 hours after the fact. Literally spent the next 70 days of the retreat trying to get back there. So that was a big waste of time. The point about these most refined experiences of bliss, or most refined levels of happiness, is that they come as a result of letting go. Right. They come as a result of the thinning or the dissolution or the vanishing of your self-centeredness. A trap that we fall into is that this whole thing about meditation, or this whole thing about enlightenment, is the transcendence of self. Actually, it's about the transcendence of personhood, of individuality, of your name, of your life, and the awakening to something greater. And the thing about that is that desire of transcendence in itself can become self-centered. It's like the very thing that we are seeking is beyond the limitations and beyond the reaches of self. It's beyond the reaches of ego. So what we find is we can find ourselves running in this mouse treadmill, this mouse wheel, because it's just, no matter how hard you push, you cannot use effort to get to non-effort. You just have to have non-effort.
Well, see, now this goes into something important, which I wanted to state, which was about faith. Like, those states that you have of bliss and happiness, of ecstasy, and then it doesn't happen again, can you still have faith in yourself to do the same practice you've done to get to that state, even if you don't experience those things? Can you? And that's important. Where once we start to lose faith, it's like, oh, my practice isn't working anymore because I can't experience those things. That becomes a trap in itself, you know? And it's not, when we get into the theory of identity and who you are, you're not so much, like you were saying, it's transcending the self. Is that what you that's what you said?
This is the initial thing that people usually have the concept of when they start, that they're going to transcend their ego and personality and experience the true self, or Godhead, or Buddha nature.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even, like, for me, it's neither, for me, in almost like a logical way of explaining it, you're not achieving anything. There's nothing to achieve. You know, you're removing these things that have blocked you from seeing that thing of, the only way I can explain is who you are. And what is that? I don't know. That's for you to investigate. But then at a certain point, there wasn't anything to remove, nor was there anything to gain. And that's something that it's a very contradictory way of looking at it, but that's the best way to sort of explain it.
For that specific statement, we refer everyone to the Diamond Sutra.
Right. Right.
One of the things I wanted to mention before we wrap up the episode was we have a friend named Master Bruce Sun, and we're definitely gonna have him on the podcast in a future episode. This guy has been practicing meditation since he was about 10, and now he's 40, and mostly in the Taoist tradition. And he was talking to us about practice last night. He was saying that practice and the path is like planting these very specific types of bamboo plants. So how these bamboo trees grow is you plant them, and for the first year you don't see anything. Your friends are going to ask you, okay, how are the bamboo plants going? I was like, oh, they're planted, they're growing, but nothing's sprouting yet. Second year, same thing. Third year, same thing. Fourth year, people are asking you, hey, you remember those bamboo plants? How are they coming along? Still haven't sprouted through the ground. These specific bamboo trees don't actually sprout until the 5th year. So what's happening is after they sprout, just within an extremely short period of time, I think he said a couple months, they grow a massive height. Literally from 0 to 15, 20 feet tall. But for 5 years, you saw nothing. So what was happening was that for those 5 years, those bamboo trees, those bamboo roots were going as deep as they possibly could into the ground, building a strong, solid foundation, absorbing all the nutrients that it possibly could. And then boom, at the 5th year, these trees sprout to 15 and 20 feet tall out of nowhere. This is the analogy for attainment's path, essentially. For years, it can seem like no changes are happening. For years, it could seem like nothing is going on, but then suddenly a decade has passed and you look at yourself where you are now from where you were back then, and it's an entire world of difference.
Yeah, it's and that's faith, and that's almost what like my own teacher says, seeing without seeing. Knowing without knowing. It's you having confidence in yourself and your practice, and just overall you and growing. And it's okay if you don't feel this or feel that, experience this or experience that, because one day, like Ryan said, those bamboo shoots are gonna just explode, and you'll see the changes, and you'll see the foundation that you built. You really will. So just to wrap things up, thank you everyone for listening to this podcast, and we appreciate it. We really do. And
yeah, if you feel that what you heard today was of any use to you, or of any use to fellow practitioners that you know, please do us a solid and share this video or share this podcast with your friends, with your family, and stay tuned for the next episode, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.